So I'm going to go on now to the next presentation, which is a 20-year retrospective of the tour. And I'd like to start by asking people, how many total garden visits do you guess have been made since the tour began 20 years ago? And then when we get to the end of my time, we'll see who was able to come close. So I wanted to start by thinking about the passage of time and how to show it. And one way is by watching our children grow. And in the amount of time that I have been running the tour, our son has grown from a little boy into this amazing man who bicycled alone from California to Massachusetts in a trip that still boggles my mind. And here he is getting ready to go. Another way to show the passage of time is by looking at our gardens. So this is our garden 20 years ago, and this is our garden today. This is actually our garden this very morning. And since we are native plant friends, I'll tell you that the purple is a California lilac, the yellow is the aquatic monkey flower, and the white in the back are cow parsnip. And the third way to think about the passage of time is what was going on in society. So in 2005, when the tour began, George Bush was president. And also in 2005, the first ever video was uploaded to YouTube. It was 19 seconds long and it's called Me at the Zoo. You can still see it online. So now I wanted to start actually by thanking the stalwart funders who have supported the tour every year for the last 20 years. And they are the Alameda County Flood Control and Water Conservation District, the Contra Costa Clean Water Program, and the Contra Costa Water District. I'm grateful to all the funders who've supported the tour, but especially these three who've just been so steadfast. So the first tour took place in 2005, and it was amazingly and astonishingly successful. It was free, which was unheard of at the time when there were garden tours, but they charged. With 55 gardens, it was big. It was the first native plant garden tour in the East Bay. There were lots of newspapers then, and they had home and garden sections, and color photos of the tour were splashed across all the covers. Talented Monica Alatorre designed this garden guide and all of the others that follow. The guide was 88 pages long. It had color photos on the cover and inside. And it was a one-day event for many years. And for the first number of years, the gardens only needed to contain 30% or more natives. And now they have to contain 70% or more natives. But when the tour began, that was what I was able to get. Let's see, I had worked as an environmental educator for 15 years prior to starting the tour, and I had coordinated many events, but never a garden tour. When I sought funding to hold the tour, I told the funders that I would have 1,500 registrants. I was pretty sure I could do that, but to myself, I thought, I want 3,000. It was so much work and took so much time. It just seemed like I should have more of an impact. With the novelty of the tour and the publicity that it got in the local papers, my phone just rang off the hook. And in that first year, 5,575 people registered for the tour, and they made 19,182 garden visits. And this welcoming woman, she was actually a greeter in a later tour at Pat Rudebush's garden, but she's such a great representation of a cheerful greeter that I have popped her in here to represent the 191 volunteers and hosts who made this first tour possible. The Fleming Garden was on the tour from 2005 to 2010. It was an astonishing garden in Berkeley. This garden set the record for the highest number of visitors at one garden in a day, and that was 1,320 people who went to the Fleming Garden on the first day of the tour. This meadow is in the Fleming Garden. It's a red fescue and wildflower meadow at the base of this steep slope. The Fleming Garden was started in the early 1950s by Jenny and Scott, and they installed it. This garden was more than 50 years old when it was on the tour. So visitors to the garden actually walked up this slope along this stream that flowed alongside the path. And my friend Chris Dundon, who was there that day, told me that it was like Disneyland. He said people just stood in line and they like went up the hill and then they turned around and they came back down again. So the Flemings, by the second tour, they installed this railing to make it a little easier to get up. And they also put in a stone path across the stream so that people walked up the hill, then they would walk over the stream and the top of the waterfall, and then they would come down on the other side of the garden so that there was a loop. Another exciting garden that was on that first tour was the Urban Bee Garden, was a research garden located near the Berkeley campus. And this garden had 531 visitors on the day of the 2005 tour. And Dr. Gordon Franke studies native bees, and this garden was specifically designed to attract a diverse variety of native bees. Dr. Franke's research showed that what he calls urbanized residential areas, but that means your garden and mine, can support a high diversity of local native species if they are planted with the right plants. This is Glenn Schneider's Berkeley Garden, which is planted with local native plants. And Glenn was really like ahead of the pack when he started planting his garden, I don't know, I suppose 30 or more years ago. His very small garden had 679 visitors that first year, and his garden was on the tour for 14 or 15 years straight. Glenn has this charming woodland in the front garden that's a cow parsnip and bunch grasses and irises I see there. And the back garden are the cheerful yellow mule's ears and the purple brodea that are actually in bloom now. This was Kern Hildebrand's garden in Walnut Creek. It was designed by Michael Filgen of Four Dimensions Landscape Company. Um, this garden had oak woodland, redwood forest, chaparral, and grassland plants. They replaced what Kern told me was a former, quote, hill of weeds, end quote, and bunch grasses created this lovely hillside meadow. On the second tour, there were 64 gardens. This is the most gardens that have ever been on the tour. There were more than 5,000 registrants. It was a big event. More than 70 talks were given on the day of the tour. Things had calmed down at the Fleming Garden, and that year there were just 844 garden visits. And for many years, the evaluations for the tour were done on paper. And so this year, information from more than 600 evaluations was tallied by hand in my living room by a team of volunteers. In 2006, Sue Duckles and her sister Sherry, who had side-by-side oak woodland gardens in the Oakland Hills, offered their garden for the first time. And they had their garden on the tour off and on for 12 years. Sue and Sherry grew up on one of these lots, and later Sherry bought the house from their mother. And when the house next door came up for sale, then Sue bought it. So the sisters removed the fence between their lots, and they freed the oaks and redwoods from the ivy that had encased them and created a beautiful native plant garden on the slope that ran downhill from their home. And Sue told me that she removed ivy from this steep slope by cutting it up in like 8 or 10 foot pieces. And then she would kind of pull it out of the ground until it created this mat. And then she would sit on her butt and she would kick that roll down the hill, and the weight of the roll would tear the ivy roots out of the ground, and she was relatively easily able to clear it. And she would leave the mass at the bottom of the hill to dry until there wasn't so much weight to it, and then take it away. That year, I received the National Wildlife Federation Conservation Achievement Award for Education, and my husband Mike and I were flown to Washington, D.C., and put up at the Mayflower Hotel of Mayflower Madam infamy, though we didn't see any of that going on. Sadly, I couldn't find the program to show here. I'm sure it will turn up tomorrow, but it still amazes me that among the co-awardees that year were former Vice President Al Gore, then California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger, and Bill McKibben. And here I'm photographed with the MC for the evening, Jack Hanna of Jack Hanna's Animal Adventures. I was the first to receive my award, and I was told, you'll be up at 8:13 right after the penguins. It was a sold out $250 a plate event at the Mayflower Hotel. There were 650 people attending. And as I made my acceptance speech, I noticed that there were these two Jumbotron screens with my face on them. And I felt like Tom Petty. And when I saw that, I just really couldn't look up anymore. In 2007, Steve Jobs introduces the first iPhone at Macworld in San Francisco. And doesn't that make you wonder like how we managed without them? In the meanwhile, Back on the home front, during the 2007 tour, 13,000 garden visits were made, and we are approaching the 50,000 cumulative garden visit total. And three new components were added to the tour in 2007. One was the native plant extravaganzas, where native plant nurseries, some of them not generally open to the public, were opened for the day of the tour, and the extravaganzas still run today. Barbecue lunches were available for purchase at several stops. And the third thing was we started select tours. They were small group tours of private gardens. One could go on a Meet the Designer tour and see three gardens that Michael Filgen or Kat Weiss or Pete Veilleux had designed, or we went to visit great bird or butterfly gardens. In 2007, Jeff Jurgi, he's a longtime garden tour host, and he also owns the Peddler Bike Shop in El Sobrante, helped us run the Fraction of a Century bike tour, which included a gourmet lunch in Gail Giffen's beautiful garden in Lafayette. Over the years, we had a walking tour of Berkeley Gardens and Meet the Do-It-Yourselfers, among many others. In 2007, Al Kite has his Moraga garden on the tour for the first time, and it would be on the tour every year for 17 years, more than any other garden. Al started taking out his front lawn in the drought in the early 1970s when it didn't make sense to him to keep watering. And this is his front garden now. He designed and installed this 50-year-old garden himself. It's a low maintenance and water conserving garden. Only new plants are watered. On the left is a dry stream bed located between vine maples. And in the sunnier parts of the garden, mature manzanitas are surrounded by chaparral plants. This is the backyard where trails wind through open areas of wildflowers that give way to tall shrubs and trees. This 25-foot long stream tumbles across the garden, and Al, who is a professional fly fisher, told me that he practiced casting into this pool across his yard. Al has seen 90 species of birds in or above his garden. In 2008, there were 55 gardens on the tour, and we're at almost 62,000 cumulative garden visits. And in December of that year, I accepted the Governor's Environmental and Economic Leadership Award in Sacramento on behalf of the tour. And you can't really tell here, but I'm actually about 12 months pregnant, and I'm sure that everyone was glad that we were able to get through the ceremony without incident. 2 weeks later, our daughter was born. And people might wonder why I do the work that I do and why I have done this for so long. And it's because I fear for the future that faces my children and yours and their as yet unborn children. I hope that you'll join me in protecting them by doing what you can to reduce your environmental impact. Doug had a terrific list of things that you can do. You can eliminate pesticide use in your own garden. I have not used pesticides in my garden in 35 years. Buy organic food. You can include native plants in your garden, preferably 70% or more, to create breeding areas for birds, but you can just start by putting any native plants in your garden. You can turn off your exterior lights at night to protect migrating birds or insects, or you can replace those lights with yellow bulbs, or you can use those things that go on and then go off again when they're needed. Install a water feature on your property and keep it clean. Birds like it to make some noise and have moving water. You can electrify your home, put on solar panels, get heat pumps, get an induction range, and you can vote in elected officials who support legislation that will protect the environment. 2009 is our 5th anniversary. We celebrate by changing the cover of the guide so that it features 3 photos instead of 4. And I love these garden guides because they really put to rest the idea that many people had that native gardens were weedy, unattractive, and not colorful. It was hard to argue with the garden guides that had these beautiful photos of native plants and native gardens on the cover. We passed 75,000 cumulative garden visits in our 5th year. My mom flew in for the tour, and we tote the baby along with us on the day of the event. And this is the start of taking our daughter with us on the tour for many years. Something really interesting happened on our 5th anniversary. For the first four years, Oakland and Berkeley together comprised 30 or 40% or more of the gardens that were on the tour. It seemed like a very localized event. But in 2009, the fifth year of the tour, two things happened. A lot of new gardens were offered. About half of the gardens on that tour were new. And for the first time, Oakland and Berkeley made up a lower percentage of the gardens. We had our first Pittsburgh garden, and there were two in Hayward and two in El Sobrante. And there were gardens at all the cities that start with P, Pleasanton, Pleasant Hill, and Pinole. It was great to see the idea of gardening with native plants spreading to other cities. So for the first 5 years of the tour, there were more than 5,000 registrants every year. But in 2010, the sixth year, there were more than 6,000 registrants, and we're at more than 91,000 cumulative garden visits. In the fall of that year, the tour was honored with the Department of Pesticide Regulations IPM Innovator Award for educating the public about pesticide-free gardening. And I'm receiving the award in Sacramento from our current state senator, Nancy Skinner. 2011 was a banner year. This was the seventh year of the tour, and there were more than 7,000 registrants. That's the most registrants that we have ever had in 1 year. And this trajectory of increasing the number of registrants by 1,000 people a year was worrying me a little. Nearly 20,000 garden visits were made in 2011. That was the most garden visits that were made in 1 year. And this is like just one day of the tour. That year, there was a high of 929 visitors at each of a cluster of small gardens in Berkeley. And this pushed the number of garden visits total up over 100,000. Excuse me. The next year, 2012, we passed 125,000 cumulative garden visits, and the first Antioch and Kensington gardens are on the tour. And this is the year that the first Mono More workshop was run. So I am not a handy person. And it came to me one day that being able to attend a workshop on how to sheet mulch would really help people to move ahead with their own projects. So my friend, the talented garden designer Kelly Marshall, and I ran these workshops for many years. We sheet mulched lawns all over Contra Costa and Alameda counties with up to 30 people in a workshop. And some of the lawns that we sheet mulched went on to become native plant gardens that were offered for the tour. In 2013, 138 cumulative garden visits had been made. This beautiful garden on the tour, it was Joan Lohman and Jen Bean's garden in Oakland. It was designed by talented Liz Simpson, who has since, sadly for us, moved to Washington State. And that year I received the Jefferson Award. Kate Kelly is a news anchor from KPIX, and she spent an afternoon in our garden filming me for a news segment on the award. 2014 was the tour's 10th anniversary, and we celebrate by changing the cover to feature one large photo and also by putting a sticker on the front. That year, we had Music in the Gardens feature. And at various gardens, you could hear lutes, flutes, banjos, guitars, and Baroque or Renaissance music. And also the 15-person a cappella Berkeley Community Chamber Singers performed at the Bee Garden. Also that year at Carol Baird and Alan Harper's Oakland Garden, there was a native plants food tasting table. And you can visit this garden on Saturday, May 4th, during the in-person tour. Also on the food front here in front of Nancy Wenninger's garden in Walnut Creek, Dan Klusenkamp, who was our date that year on the day of the tour with his family, is encouraging our children to eat termite grubs. And his daughter appears more willing than mine. And also that year, Nalani Heath Delaney's garden in El Cerrito was on the tour. This was designed and installed by Nalani and her partner, and this area was formerly a kind of scruffy lawn. In 2015, nearly 13,000 garden visits were made during the tour, and we were almost at 165,000 cumulative garden visits. That year, Bob Sorensen's local native plant garden in Orinda is on the tour, and this home previously had very large lawns in the front and back. And now the front yard is this meadow that's full of buttercups, and the back has been planted with local native plants from Briones. And Bob made this bridge over the creek that flows through the back garden. It is just such an amazing garden, and I hope to have it back on the tour next year. The cover of this 2016 guide is a photo of Nancy and Robert Jolda's Piedmont Garden, and we are a hair's breadth from reaching 175,000 cumulative garden visits. And this is Leslie Zander's Albany Garden, and she's been a host for many years. And it was very interesting to me to see in the evaluations that when people were asked, what were your favorite gardens? So many of them would say the Fleming Garden in the Berkeley Hills and Leslie Zander's garden. And they were so different. Like the Fleming Garden was a spectacular, large, garden on this hillside. And Leslie had this modest garden in the flats of Albany, but people said they loved Leslie's garden because it was felt that it was something that they could do. 2017, this photo was taken by Liz Simpson in one of her Oakland gardens. And also in 2017, Nancy Niemeyer's garden was on the tour for the first time. And Nancy Niemeyer has one of the most colorful gardens you'll ever see. This was previously a large lawn. It's in Clayton. Nancy has cut her water use in half since the garden was converted to natives. You can visit this garden this year on Sunday, May 5th during the Bringing Back the Natives garden tour. And this is also such an interesting garden because Nancy designed it by modeling it after an ancient Roman garden. She said she loved history and plants, and she has all these features, including that black and white tile mosaic that she made that is just, it's so interesting and so beautiful, and that beautiful sculpture. 2018, there was a theme to the tour, and it was art and music in the gardens. Tour attendees could purchase art at 10 gardens, sketch in Leslie Buck's Berkeley Garden, where art supplies were provided, attend a talk on nature journaling in Orinda, or learn how to make garden mosaics in Alameda. In addition, artful gardens, those containing handmade tile tabletops or mosaics, sculptures, or whimsical art pieces were featured. Finally, this year and also the following year, the Stanley Middle School Jazz Messengers performed at a tour garden. In this case, they were at Martha and Kerwin Lee's garden in Lafayette, and they were just terrific. I don't even like jazz really, but I went specifically because I wanted to hear this group, and the kids were so talented. It was really fun. Like people came and the garden filled up just for this, the time that they were playing. It was just great. In 2019, on our 15th anniversary, we are a hair's breadth from crossing the 200,000 cumulative garden visits line. We have another sticker on the cover of the tour as a celebration. This is our last printed garden guide. So this brings us to 2020. And it takes a year to coordinate each tour. As soon as one tour has ended in May, I'm out visiting potential gardens for the next year's event. In spring and early summer, I visit, photograph, and write up the descriptions of the gardens. In the fall, I update the website. In the winter, I prepare to open registration and do publicity. As COVID approached in March of 2020, I wondered what to do. It was such a strange and worrisome thing. I wondered if I had an obligation to cancel the tour to protect the hosts and volunteers and guests. I wondered if I even had the right to cancel the tour because I had received funding to hold the event from funders. I wondered if I would lose a year's income if I didn't hold the tour, as I had promised the funders that I would. But on March the 22nd, I canceled the tour with its 49 gardens and 50 talks and 9 workshops and 3 plant sales. The garden guide was one day from being printed when I made the decision to cancel the tour. There would have been a $7,000 printing bill and thousands of garden guides in my living room with nowhere to go if I had not canceled the tour that day. And 2 days later, I got an email from Ethan Bodnar, who I did not know. He was a tour registrant. And he wrote, quote, "Wanted to reach out with an idea for the garden tour this year. I've heard that the tour has been canceled, which of course makes complete sense for everyone's safety. What if each of the gardeners presented their garden through a live video on Instagram? Imagine you might already be thinking about such a system. And then there's this like punctuation face, which I never really understand. But I, who still don't know how to use Instagram, and I am very bad with computers in general, I had not been thinking of any such thing. And I dismissed this idea out of hand. But Ethan had mentioned the upcoming Theodore Payne online tour, which was taking place in just a couple of days. The Theodore Payne tour had been scheduled to take place earlier than my tour, so they had to cancel and regroup earlier than I did. I had never watched a Zoom or ever sat in front of my computer all day long before this, but I did those two things on Saturday, March the 28th. And what trailblazers they were at the Theodore Payne Foundation. Their online tour was riveting. And that night I called Ethan and then Stephanie Preugel, who I had just met once when I visited her garden as she was a 2020 tour applicant. But I knew that she was an environmental advocate and I could tell she was creative and motivated. And 5 years later, she is still co-hosting the tour with me. And that night, when I called and asked if they would help me put on a virtual tour, they both said yes. So these screenshots are from that first scary online event. The virtual tour, called Sundays in the Gardens with the Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour, took place over the course of 3 Sundays in April and May when we were all locked down. It was organized in less than 5 weeks. 800 people watched the first day and 600 people watched the second day. I had asked the hosts whose gardens were on the canceled tour if they might be willing to give a live tour of their garden through Zoom, and 25 of them bravely signed on. We ran an online class on how to Zoom. Ethan and I coached all the 25 homeowners as they practiced Zooming through their gardens. Everyone was coached at least once. Many of the hosts had 3 coaching sessions. One host had 7 coaching sessions, and then during one of them, she cried. Live Zoom was a hard way to run a garden tour, as the camera was almost always moving faster than the Wi-Fi could cope with. So the images were often blurry. But the hosts did their best to remember the mantra, you can never pan too slowly, only too fast. 14 hours of programming were offered over the course of these 3 days. The content included 2 presentations from keynote speaker Doug Tallamy, who at that time was available on short notice, visits to 25 native plant gardens, tours of 2 native plant nurseries, East Bay Wilds and the Watershed Nursery, a presentation on sheet mulching, and a couple of Q&A sessions. It was an astonishing feat to be able to pull this off in just 1 month, and Ethan and Stephanie were fantastic to work with. This online event was what started the tour's YouTube channel, which now has 3,500 subscribers, and it contains the 120 videos on gardening with California native plants that have been shown in the virtual tour over the last 4 years. YouTube, the videos have this whole other life. A number of them have had more than 5,000 views. One has had more than 20,000 views. The next year, 2021, we are still online. This was a 4-day event held on consecutive Sundays over the course of a month. The days were themed. One day was gardening for wildlife. One was native plant garden design and plant selection. 2 of them were a potpourri of inspirational native plant gardens. Our very own Zoom Czarina, Jessica Dickinson Goodman, joins our team, and she has been fantastic, as you know, if you have watched the online tour before. In the middle of one night, I was thinking about the drawbacks of Zoom, and I realized that we should not feature the gardens through live Zooming, where wind would hit the microphone and Wi-Fi connections failed as people moved away from their homes and deeper into the garden, but that we should instead ask the hosts to make video of their gardens, and we should run those videos. And this is the format that we still follow today. So these obliging hosts who were bankers or garden designers or marketing people, they taught themselves how to film and edit videos, and they made videos of their gardens. And their dedication to encouraging and helping others to garden with native plants is awe-inspiring. In 2021, Wendy Takuda had her own garden on the virtual tour. Wendy Takuda is an award-winning journalist who worked as a primetime anchor in local TV news in the Bay Area for almost 40 years. My husband, Mike, was born and raised in the Bay Area, and he told me, I grew up watching Wendy Takuda. She's legendary. When Mike heard that I was talking with Wendy Takuda, he told me it was as though I had said, I am talking with Michelle Obama. For the 2022 tour, our son suggested that I hold both the online and in-person tours, and I accused him of wanting to be the death of me so that he could access his inheritance early. But still, as I thought about it, the online tour had advantages. It reached a new audience. both during the live show and then afterward on YouTube. People loved the online tour, saying that online they could, in a way, have the host to themselves for 20 minutes, which never happened during the in-person tour. And the virtual tours had each added 1,000 new emails to the tour's database. So in 2022, for the first time, we had both an online and an in-person tour. And it seemed about time to make another big change. For the first time, the in-person tour was a 2-day event. We passed 200,000 cumulative garden visits. We also added electrified home features to the tour. So you might be wondering, why am I talking about electrification? Isn't this a garden tour? And it's because every day in the Bay Area, we light millions of little fires to heat our water, our food, our homes, and to power our cars. The gas that is burned to do this is heating up the planet. We all have to stop burning gas and switch to clean energy sources. And the sooner we do that, the better for our children's futures. In addition to helping to solve the biodiversity crisis by gardening with native plants, you can help address the climate crisis by replacing your gas-burning appliances with electric ones. And I can tell you from our own experience that electrifying is great. Electrifying your home can save you money, protect your and your children's health, keep you more comfortable, and help reduce global warming. So for the first time on the tour, 2 electrified homes were open so that tour registrants could see induction ranges and heat pumps that heat and cool the house and heat water in person. Electrification volunteers were on hand to answer questions about electrification, as were the hosts, and that still continues today. Last year, 2023, was a big year for the tour. More than 220,000 garden visits have been made in total since the tour's inception. On the in-person tour, there were more electrified homes. 20 of the tour stops had electrified in some way, and 4 of those homes were open for visitors to tour. Almost 1,000 visits in total were made to those 4 electrified homes. The online tour offered 10 hours of videos and talks on gardening with native plants over the course of 2 days. And these photos show my friend Ruth Rogow, who lives in Berkeley and who was inspired by Doug Tallamy to install a native plant garden. And Ruth painted this Metahelia poppy on the wall of the garage that faces her garden. You can visit Ruth's garden on this year's tour on Saturday, May the 4th. Also in 2023, in the spring, I was a guest on Jennifer Jewell's Cultivating Place podcast. Live interviews make me nervous, but Jennifer is a warm and gracious host, and I enjoyed my conversation with her. You can find this interview on the Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tours website under Press Room. Also in 2023, the Keystone Species signs were created. So you heard Doug talking about the importance of planting with Keystone species, and you might have wondered, well, what are they? And you will find a list of our local Keystone Species plants on the Bringing Back the Natives Garden Tour website under Keystone Species. I had heard Doug Tallamy speak many times, but late one night I realized that he wasn't just saying plant with native plants. He was saying plant with keystone species, as they are the plants with the most ecological value to wildlife. In a stroke of good fortune, I met Jennifer Durking online, and she offered to make the keystone species signs. She made 42 of them. She did an incredible job. You can see here that she has a photo of the plant, a picture of the butterfly or moth that can lay eggs on that plant, and its caterpillar. And if you're like me, and after hearing Doug, and you're yearning to see caterpillars in your garden, you can see how the development of these beautiful signs was really exciting. I wrote 2 grant proposals, which were funded by the Alameda and Contra Costa Fish and Wildlife Commissions, and I was able to get the funds to have the Keystone Species signs printed, and they were used for the first time during the in-person tour in 2023. This brings us to 2024, and this spring, I held the tour's first electrified home tour. There were 4 electrified homes, including mine, were open. Nearly 600 people registered for this event, and 30 volunteers were on hand to answer questions. And this brings us to the end of this presentation. So in summary, 327 native plant gardens have been featured on the tour since it began 20 years ago in 2005. The total number of garden visits to date is 220,090. The tour has more than 20,000 people in the database. So people often wonder what I do on tour day. I have never had my own garden on the garden tour, as I want to be out visiting gardens along with everyone else. So I'm looking forward to touring gardens next month on the tour's 20th anniversary event, and I hope to see you there. I'll close by asking if anyone got close to 220,000 visits in their garden guesses. And we have a few minutes so I can take questions. So there's some comments about the Keystone species signs. They are fantastic. Yes, you can get copies of the Keystone species signs. You can just download them and print them from your own computer.